of time and effort to make it more and more so. Say again?
On the air.
Okay.
On the air.
All righty. It's the old farts, otherwise known as Adventures in Technology. Uh, Given that, we're going to at least start talking about something a little different than any show I can remember. The idea is technology is expanding at a rapid rate. And one of the things that technology is doing is it's changing how man interacts with his environment, which is probably true from the beginning of time. The first time somebody picked up a tree branch and used it as a club. The difference today, and the thing that we're kind of like to explore today, is the idea that we can change man himself with technology. We've been doing some of that. We've been doing for a long time. We take various drugs to accomplish various things. Some of the things that we're accomplishing are good and some not so good. But we can use those drugs to change man and his behavior. There are two kind of areas that I think we want to explore. One is the physical, changing the physical man, putting in a prosthetic to replace or improve somebody's arm or somebody's leg, or possibly somebody's eye or hearing. The other kind of improvement would be to put something in their brain that would allow either to repair or deal with disabilities, or possibly add abilities that don't exist anymore to date. One example which comes to mind would be reading of minds, sending thoughts to someone else electronically. So in any case, that's kind of what we're going to talk about a little bit. The real question would be is, what's the world going to be like in 20, 30, 40, 50 years if these things are implemented? How do we interact with each other? How do we interact with the environment, etc.? So that's the introduction.
As an add to the introduction, we have to think about Ray Kurzweil, actually, who invented the text-to-speech machine, and nowadays we take it for granted. And in the same on the same path to technological innovation, his idea is to what he describes as singularity, so that you can keep your body in shape with all the good diets and all the various things, and make sure you take various supplements, so that one of these days there will be, number one, off-the-shelf organs available, which are real organs, or there are off-the-shelf artificial intelligence derived systems that can be placed in the person, so that the people will live forever. So that's the idea there. But at the same time, this does raise a lot of questions. For example, right now, we do know that we have various prosthetic devices available. People replace their knees, people replace their, people get insulin replacement, people get implants to treat Parkinson's disease, and various others where enhancements are possible. And we do have transplant. You transplant organs, and there are artificial hearts available that can take over for some time until a real transplant is available. And so you have, and technologies are moving that way, so that you can replace organs that may be human derived or they might be animal derived. But at the same time, there are also devices that are prosthetic, which are independent of these things that can work. For example, you pointed out the physicist who had ALS, and he was able to use the device which he would use his eyes to type, and such devices are being created, and advancements are every day happening, including where electrical activity of the brain can be channeled to do a whole bunch of things that ordinarily we have never thought of, including reading people's mind, reading people's ideas, or actually sending impulses. There have been experiments done where impulses they claim have been sent over a distance, but I'm not sure how well documented they are. But at the same time, although these things are possible, the question then is, how does these software behind that and the hardware behind that lead us to the interface between human and machine, and what is the control, what are the controls, and what are the ethical issues that show up, and how do we get over those, and how do we solve those issues? Because you will, I mean, long time ago, you would do not long time ago, actually, even now, you would do the glucose testing every day by pricking your finger. Now there is a 24/7 glucose monitoring device which you can attach to your skin, and it continuously monitors your glucose level, and it shows up on your smartphone. And so you don't have to keep pricking your arm, keep pricking your finger. So, but that is again devices which help people to live better. And of course, then the dangers are, if the smartphone fails, if the continuous glucose monitor fails, if the software fails, if the software gets hacked. And so you can see all these ramifications that are possible, but then somebody has to take care of that part. With that, I'm going to stop talking.
Well, you did bring up one thing which I should have mentioned in the intro, and that is, was it 10 or 20 years ago, they had a truly artificial heart. They took your arteries and veins and they stuck it into a pump external to you. And this guy lived for a few days at minimum without a heart.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if they got to the point that where they made it small enough and powerful enough that they can implant this mechanical heart.
Yes, the
But
devices are much smaller now, and they take over completely. But of course, it's not complete replacement yet. We're not there yet completely, but still, technology has advanced a lot so that the devices are smaller, better tolerated, so that people can live without, while they are waiting to do something, to get replacement or get a surgery done.
the interesting question I think that we originally started with was, what does that mean for humanity? Obviously, it means that someone who has heart trouble, they can live longer. Does that mean that they live longer than people who don't have good hearts? Excuse me. Today, I don't think that's true, and it's not clear to me that based on my understanding of the technology, that will be true in the near future. But let's, for the moment, say that the thing that kills people through old age, being that we're old farts, we worry about what it is that's going wrong with our bodies, it can be repaired or replaced. What happens then? What happens when the elderly don't die and make space for the young. Um, what does society look like then? Hi, Colleen.
Hi, Corinne.
I
We were sort of kicking around the topic of Colleen just joined us. She actually works for a living. Uh, so in any case, we were kicking around the question of we started to identify various things that already exist today to repair or enhance the human body. And we were just talking about the idea of an artificial heart.
Oh, okay,
And,
yeah.
You know, the artificial heart exists. It allows people who are sick to live longer. I don't know at this point whether it's self-contained enough that people can get the implant and just walk around and live a normal life. But if it doesn't exist today, it will in the near future. The question I posed was, let's pretend for the moment that we find a way for us old people, Chuck and Oman and I are old, that we don't die of old age. Then what happens? What happens when the old stick around very much longer and there's no longer room for the young? What does society mean then? It's a different thought, but something that we need to consider because there's 8 billion people in the world. And that
But haven't we already seen the impact longevity has on the financial system, because Social Security was only really meant to last a little while. You know what I mean? Most people, are now living way longer than what they have money for. So, or at least, for what the government had planned on. I think most people were living less years than they are now.
I can remember when I was young in the 1950s, if a guy lasted until he was 65, he didn't last much longer than that. And today, if you make it to 65, there's a good chance you're going to make it another 10, 15, 20 years or more, as the case may be.
Right.
But how has that changed society? If we think of it in terms of how that changed society, maybe give us an idea of how society will change in the future as people live even longer. Excuse me. I mean, you could go dystopian and say the reason why you have kids is so you'll get organs to transplant that will allow you to live.
I don't know if that I don't know if my daughter would love that idea.
Well, yeah,
I only had you so I could get a kidney just in case.
I was thinking of a similar thing with my daughter, and I think her immediate response would be to go get a gun and take care of the problem.
that's why the research is continuing to get artificial organs created, get xenografts created, so that you can rely on a pig rather than a human. I mean, this is a whole different regenerative medicine where organs are being thought of how to recreate them, so that you can have an artificial kidney, artificial heart, artificial liver, but those are the larger things. But then small, or for that matter, artificial windpipe, those things are possible. But then the question again is, how far will the technology take us, and how do you then the bottom line comes back to what Bob said. Then if the older people live longer, how does it get us overall as a society, and no room for younger ones? So what do you do then?
Well, it really would it, how much of an impact would it have for depending on how wealthy you are, that you have an ability to to purchase these things or not. So so money may still come into play in another way.
Right, that's true. It could kind of be out of reach for some people. Plus the technology, I don't know, I think the technology is getting creepier. I mean, I have like an ICD, to control my rhythm and stuff like that. And that's considered an enhancement, I think, too. But what they're doing nowadays with this nanotech, it's like you don't have control over that, and it's something that actually has some kind of presence, inside of your body. And I don't know, I don't think I'd be I wouldn't want something smart inside my body doing whatever it thinks it needs to do. You know what I mean? It's like, I wouldn't want it that way.
Even a pacemaker is smart enough to kickstart whenever the pacemaker finds there is something going on, so the kick happens. So you want that kind of smartness built in. But then where does that smartness cross the line? That's what you are asking.
That's a very good question, Armand. That's a very good question. Because I think people have different opinions of where that line is, like how much do you want to like give up to get a little more of a benefit and stuff and the thing is like the kids, they're so a lot of people are critical of kids, teenagers, and young adults, how hyper focused they are on their devices, and they don't really connect with people the way we used to connect and stuff. And they're the ones that are coming up with this technology, and we're the older people are the ones that are getting these like sort of enhancement things and stuff. So you wonder like how much are they actually thinking about how it affects your humanness, over a certain amount of time or whenever, and what kind of tech they use.
Exactly. That is why I brought up the point that given a lot of these devices will be software driven, there will be people who can actually hack into it and raise havoc in a certain population, and we will not know what is going on because younger generation are much more in tune with those buttons which we have no clue about. So that's an important point to think about.
Yeah.
Well, you were talking about nano intelligence, and I'm not quite sure I understand what you're talking about and whether it exists.
I think it's kind of something it's new technology, but it actually kind of was talked about a little bit. People were talking a little bit about it with the vaccines and stuff, how they can, I don't know if it's actual or if it's something that it's just in the like a learning stage or whatever, but they were talking about using vaccines as delivery points for small little micro robots that will go in and monitor your kind of like how your smartwatch monitors your oxygen levels and your blood and all the details of your health. The nanotech would get in to your body and just kind of stay there, and it sends back information to your doctor or to whatever, wherever it's supposed to send data to. But it's like these little tiny critters that they're using to like monitor. It's like, I don't know, it seems it's very creepy.
You don't need the nanotech for that. I mean, I would imagine a pacemaker itself is being monitored a few hundred miles away, constantly. So wouldn't you like the healthcare provider be monitoring? And so that's where the question comes about ethics and lines. But I have not read anything about that can be injected into the bloodstream, because bloodstream is not that tolerant of little guys running around, because bloodstream is not that tolerant. And
I hope it's not like that. I think I read about it, or people were talking about it, and it seemed a little bit like, it pretty advanced technology. It's definitely something that like we just don't have any exposure to yet. It's probably being developed while we're talking about it.
But
But
what the
they're probably, it'll probably just come out and we won't even know how long it's been being
Well,
developed.
I have some questions as to whether it's even possible, the way you described it. Um, this nanoparticle would need to have an energy source and would need to have some way of sending a message outside, which would mean it would have to have some kind of an amplification. And
Well, I've heard that the nanotech inside your body. Now, keep in mind the human body, it is mostly it's electric. The human body is like mostly it has mostly water. It generates its own electricity. There you can measure the human body, the energy that's coming out of us. So what I've heard is that the nanotech will I've not studied it or anything, but it's what they're saying is that it can draw energy. It's like a rechargeable thing that if it's in your body, if it's in the human body, it's powered by the human body just by being in it. That's how the tech would work. I think that's how they were saying it would work. It
That's a
takes energy.
possibility. That's
I
a
know it's
possibility.
crazy.
But
I mean, you say it like
if it's a glucose monitor that instead of having a battery from outside is drawing the electrical activity from your skin, so that what is the difference? It is similar thing. For example, you are given a drug patch that actually uses electrical current to pass the material across the skin. And so you can see the devices, some of the devices are there already, but whether nanotech will become more, I've not read about this yet, but I'm just assuming that if the nanotech uses similar kind of line of technology without injecting it into the blood, then probably is sitting on the skin and taking readings from the brain about their Parkinson's monitor, or taking readings about the glucose, or taking readings about the pacemaker, and all those consolidated, sending them somewhere. Those are possible. And at this time, there are technologies available where you could inject it into the blood. For example, somebody has cancer, you can inject material into their body with a toxin attached to it, so that the toxin will go to this specific place where it is needed. That kind of technology is available. And that is where, that is for treatment. And again, not everybody is the candidate. Not everybody can afford to get that. And it becomes, again, what Chuck pointed out, money, money, money.
yeah.
I would like to think that something like Parkinson's would be able to be dealt with better by some of this new technology.
It's available right now because people with Parkinson's, they do implant deep brain stimulators. But not everybody is a candidate, but those are available for after the patient is evaluated to be the patient to benefit with such a thing. And those are available, and they work wonders actually. As soon as the monitor is turned on, the patient is new.
Okay. Actually, a family friend is dealing with Parkinson's as we speak. And the assumption is that whatever it is now, it will get worse until such time it's over. You're describing something that, in theory, is available to him. It exists. Whether it's available to him is the question.
Yes, because the patient has to be evaluated, because not everybody is a candidate for that.
Okay. He's not rich, but I will pass it along and see what, maybe the insurance company is looking for somebody.
That's good to know. Yes.
Yeah. So, but what does it mean if these things become available? what does it mean to society? Or what's the ethics? That's another question. Human nature says you want to survive. These enhancements go along with human nature. It makes it more likely that you will survive. Is that appropriate? Is it, I hate to use the word moral and ethical, but I think it applies.
I sometimes I think of, like, your health is, this is coming from my, I guess, my religious side of myself, is your body. You have to be a good steward of what you've been given, and take care of yourself as best you can. And if that action prolongs your life, somewhat, then I don't have a problem with that. I don't think people are going to live forever, but of course, there's a guy that they want you to put your essence, your consciousness into a computer. And that's how people are going to, they think people are going to live forever by doing that.
Ray
But-
Kurzweil.
Yeah. It's Ray. Yeah. He's like, he thinks you're going to put your consciousness and stuff into like a computer, and you'll be living forever in some computer. And who wants that? I wouldn't want that. But that's what he's saying. Some people do want that. And, if that works, I don't know if it works. I don't know if it's a theory or if it actually, if they've tried it, and you don't know what's going on behind closed doors. That's for sure.
Well, you don't need closed doors for this, where you have people who get their bodies frozen for
Exactly.
future. I mean, you have
Ted Williams.
imagine that. Those are, I mean, if you have money, you freeze your body, and next thing you know, some advancement happens, and they call for make me awake again. But those are our futuristic things that are possible. But at the same time, adding to what Colleen talked about, medical profession is actually geared to defy death. But then the question comes up: there is a certain lifespan which we can't defy, unless we get into Ray Kurzweil's universe.
Well, I mean, what is the lifespan? I have two great grandfathers, one who lived to 98 and two. One of my wife's, I think, great grandfathers lived to about 100. And this was without any of the enhancements, except possibly drugs, that we were talking about a little bit earlier. So what is the human lifespan?
That is what is very difficult to define. It's only what we know by observation and from data that has been preserved by some of the European countries. How long do people really live? And you have individuals who are supposed to be 130 or something like that, but not everybody lives that long, because organs wear and tear, because we are essentially a machine. Although we have capability of repair, but that repair process also ages. And with that, the wrenches and the pliers and everything else gets rusted, and the organs never get repaired. So that's the problem with that lifespan concept. So not everybody lives long, but then you have these in various parts of the world, so-called blue zones, where people live longer because of certain diets, certain environment, certain genes. And so you have a whole bunch of these different parameters that govern somebody's longevity. And not everybody is the same.
Well, we talked earlier about replacing various things that otherwise are breaking down. So at how much can you replace and still be alive? The interesting question that came to me a moment ago was, what is life? if I were able to download my consciousness to a computer, which could be renewed periodically or moved around so that this consciousness remained, am I alive?
Well, I just wanted to stop and let Chuck chime in, but I'm going to say this thing, that there is this idea of uploading or downloading the consciousness or all the things in my brain onto a computer, and then downloading it or uploading and downloading it back to I don't know where. But then that actually brings us to the question you are asking, am I really alive? I don't know what the answer to that question is. Although people, Ray Kurzweil talks about singularity and a whole bunch of other things. I don't know whether we are there to define when my information is downloaded onto a silica-based system, and where do I find myself? I don't know.
Well, you know the movie, have you ever seen the movie Tron? It's like if you go into a digital world, then who controls you then? now you're in your consciousness is in some, control of somebody else, a computer, and you're locked in by a computer instead. It's crazy, isn't it? It's like, and the technology has just caused you to now start to wonder, what kind of things. Now I guess we're talking about stuff, would we want to have it? What if it becomes like you will have it, that kind of stuff. if you don't have a choice, if you don't want it, or if you do want it and stuff.
And the other question is what Bob just raised is, which organs can be replaced? A lot of organs, some of the organs you can replace, but some of the other organs you can't. For example, somebody's layers of skin, you can replace some of it, but you can't replace the whole thing unless there is some mechanism generated to regenerate the whole skin, which is very difficult. Similarly, you have all the different interconnecting things, the wires in our body. You can replace segments of blood vessels, segments of nerves, but not all. It's fraught with danger at this time. And so I don't know how to deal with those things.
Well, again, it depends on what it is you're trying to preserve. If life is your conscious, which by the way is interesting, because what do you do when you go into a coma? It's a coma, I've heard, I don't know, you know better than I, is a form of living death. And we, in fact, induce a coma on people to help them repair things that otherwise would be very difficult for the body to repair. If you don't have your left arm anymore, does that mean you're not alive? And if you don't have the left arm, that's a whole bunch of stuff you don't have to replace. So if you take it to a logical extreme, as long as whatever the essence of life is, whatever that may be, arbitrarily, I would say consciousness and memory, then you don't need the rest of it.
Going back on what you were talking about earlier about bodies being frozen, my understanding is that they actually removed the head from the
Ted
body.
Williams. Yeah, Ted Williams. I don't know about anybody else. I do remember Ted Williams. His son decided.
Son also.
Oh, the son had the same thing done?
Yes.
Oh, I didn't know that. I decided that the son didn't like his father, and he wanted to make sure that the father would be generated so he could beat the hell out of him. But
You can attach the head to any body that's in good shape.
Theoretically. I don't know. But getting on to adding things to the brain, for example, that doesn't exist at the present time, or at least I don't know that it exists. For example, putting in an implant that would allow communication between the brain and someone else, possibly someone else with a similar implant, but maybe somebody who didn't have the implant. If we could do that, would that be a good or a bad thing? Certainly it would improve communication. At least the thought would be cleaner, unfiltered by people's use of language.
Well, it would still
Theoretically,
be
it is possible.
language.
Yeah, theoretically it is
I
possible.
suppose, yeah.
Thoughts are done with language. So that Colleen is right.
And
So-
and some in some ways you wouldn't maybe be able to filter like all of it. It's like sometimes people that the movies where somebody's psychic and they hear everything, they can't shut it off. Like they hear everything because they're connected to everything. They hear everything. So it might be something like that where this tech could cause it to be not just communication, but constant communication, like what we're talking. We think that the kids are connected now. Wait till they wait till they're connected digitally in their brains, and they don't even have to touch anything. They just think about it and they say it.
Now there is something called pre-thought, which we are not conscious of, but there are mechanisms available that can catch that and then translate it into real words. So that although I'm not conscious of pre-thought, but there are systems available that can capture that and then produce the word. So those are available right now, but in experimental environments. And those are the ones that people are trying to use to control prosthetics. So that when I want to move my arm, I am not consciously telling my arm to move, but I have generated a pre-thought that makes my arm to move. And that's what they are trying to capture to do the same thing with the prosthetic.
Kind of off the topic slightly, but you were just describing something. My understanding is that the medulla oblongata is the thing that really controls the movement of the muscles. That thoughts go through that. So pre-thought would be.
It is rather complicated.
Yeah.
Because there is an area of the brain, what is called as the motor cortex, which actually generates the thought process to move things. But then there are central areas in the brain that modulate that, make it seamless, make it without jerky movements. And then those orders are then taken down through the medulla into the spinal cord so that all the limbs coordinate things the way I want it, or the way I think I want it. So when I move my arms, that is possible because things are generated in my head and then coordinated between different areas of the brain at the same time at a dizzying speed, which I can't even imagine.
Yeah. Well, the reason I bring it up is if what I described was true, then a baby who moves just, I don't know if there's any thought involved, but gradually through training, in many cases most cases self-training, figures out how to make that movement do what they want to have done. And maybe that's the area that is trained is the thing that you need to contact, not so much the thing that. Okay, I'm getting lost in my own thoughts.
Let me address what you just mentioned.
Okay.
When a baby is born, it gets into a little bit of biology. When a baby is born, the connections the brain and the body parts, excuse me, are connected by nerves, wires, and those wires need insulation. That insulation is laid down on those wires at a different rate in different regions of the brain and the spinal cord and the other nerves. And that's laying down of that insulation determines the milestones that a baby goes through. If those layers of insulation are not laid down at the right time, the baby cannot get through the milestones as we know them. So the baby begins to crawl, baby begins to smile, baby begins to get up, and baby begins to walk around the chair, and baby points. All those things are possible because this gradual laying down of that insulation that makes connections between different brain areas possible. And if that fails, we are in trouble. And that's why that becomes very important.
What you're talking about, Dom, obviously you have a great deal of medical information. I know you do some teaching. What is your background?
Neuroscience.
Oh,
Okay.
In
that
case you were
explains
wondering.
it.
Yeah.
Is that what you teach?
Yes.
Okay, well, that's great to know.
Part of my teaching is that neurology. So that, I mean, that's why I brought this up. The connections are important. That's why we talk about how we walk around, we move, we take it for granted, but that connectivity is possible during the first couple of years of life. And that's why when you have a baby, they need a lot of fat in their diet. If the fat is not appropriate, fat is not in the diet, the insulation is not possible. So that's an important point to actually recognize. So.
That explains something, because I always wondered, I assumed that kids learned how to do things by watching the people around them.
Yes, of course.
But what do you do if the baby is blind?
Well, that's a very tough thing to explain. But if the baby is able to hear, that's a distinct advantage. But a lot of sensory, a lot of information to our brain comes through the eyes. But then a lot of information comes through the ears. If the baby is able to hear, they can coordinate a lot of things if everything else is okay. And there's a lot of work done on that as well. But on the other hand, if a person has the eyes are not working, the ears are not working, that's a very tough situation. Tougher, but that doesn't mean they cannot do things. It becomes tougher.
I agree. We'll have a couple of minutes left. What kind of future, assuming that the technology it goes the way we think it's going to go based on our conversation, what kind of a future would we like to see? Not necessarily what we're going to see, but what would we like to see? I'll throw out something if nobody else has something. I'd like
Chuck was going to say something.
Oh, okay. Chuck?
Go ahead.
Oh, I was trying to fill in the blank space. If you're in television or radio, the worst thing that could possibly happen is blank space and no noise. I'd like to see more integration between the old and the new in terms of people, children, and grandparents or conceivably great grandparents, so that knowledge becomes more available to the young quicker. And not only just plain knowledge, but the understanding of how that knowledge can be applied. I'm not quite sure how that affects you and I, but that would be a start point. Anybody?
Well, I think I think what probably will happen is what usually happens. There's always some people, like we were talking about before, that it's out of reach. They won't have the means to kind of access that kind of, tech and stuff. But then there's also the people that will they won't want it. They would want to just, unless it's medically necessary, like an ICD or a pacemaker, they may not want to, get into all of those enhancements. Now, the younger people, they probably will want to. And then you've got this divide of people that, not just young and old, but there's going to be young people that probably won't want it either. But there could be some kind of divisional thing happening where people that don't want to have it become where they can't compete, or where they can't even like have a conversation with somebody that's enhanced or has tech in them, or in part of their brain or their body or something, but they can't either compete mentally or even physically because of the lack of the enhancements, or the enhancements that other people have. So there could be like divisional things happening that, I think that because we'd have to be aware of that and try to, still allow people to be accepting of people that either have it or people that don't have it, and instead of like, kind of separating, we just need to, accept people, the way they choose to be, just like that we do now. But with tech, it'll be a little bit different, but a similar thing. The problems that we face now are probably similar to what we're going to face later, but with different reasons why we have differences.
Okay.
Hopefully a lot of these technologies in the medical field will become less expensive as time marches on also. So it'll be more available to more people if they choose to want to benefit by it.
Well,
I also agree with Chuck there that I'm hoping the technologies will become more available to everybody, and so that they become less expensive. But at the same time, you do have certain individuals, as Colleen pointed out, who may not want any of that. And at this time itself, we have individuals who refuse a blood transfusion because they have certain belief they don't want it. But then how do you change that if their life depends on it? So those are challenges that are present in the medical field, in spite of having the technology available. But then the second layer is, if the technology is exorbitant, then we will have that divide, as Colleen pointed out. Some people will get it, other people will not, because they can't afford it. And so that is going to continue to be a problem forever, actually, unless it becomes so cheap, as Chuck pointed out. And I don't know what level of cheap will make it accessible to everybody. So that's another problem.
well, if you look at transplants, for example, initially transplants were unbelievably expensive. Now, the limitation on most transplants, to my understanding, is the availability of the organ to transplant rather than the cost. The insurance companies have factored in the cost of transplants, and it goes along with your premium.
Mm-hmm.
So one would assume that something similar would be true in the future. So perhaps there will always be some who either because they can't afford insurance or for other reasons are unable to get it, maybe medically. They can't deal with whatever the transplant technology involves. But most people, in theory, I would think, could eventually get to the point where there would be transplants. And if it's truly artificial rather than a replacement organ, it would be even more likely that it would be available to anybody who really wanted it, assuming they could survive long enough to be in line to when the surgeon gets around to it. Or possibly something we haven't addressed yet, which is one of the technologies that's beginning to come to the forefront is artificial intelligence. And artificial intelligence basically allows a variety of tasks that currently or in the past humans have been required to be able to accomplish. AI is beginning to deal with those things, and maybe they could become the new surgeons. So even less likely that there would be a limitation on these transplants.
On a different way, a different area, I'd like to see somehow or other get treated better is the problem we have in this country as far as drug addiction, as well as mental illness, and whether any of this technology can be used to benefit these people, because it certainly is a big problem.
Well, some mental illnesses are dealt with already through pharmacology, which is technology.
And talk therapy, that's a technology too.
You said
Talk therapy. I mean,
Okay.
talk therapy meaning sit down with a person and interact.
But there's
Understand.
thousands of cases of people on the streets, homeless people, that a large percentage of them are because of mental illness. And for whatever reason, they just want to continue doing what they're doing. And somehow or other, we've got to be able to find a way to be able to reach these people.
If they don't want to be reached, should we reach them anyway?
That is a very difficult question to answer, because that's where, although we do not have enough mental health practitioners at various levels, people are striving to get trained. At the same time, that question is perpetual. If somebody does not want to be included in the treatment, they don't want to get and come in to a facility and live there. They would prefer to live outside, and but it's kind of very complicated. How do you deal with all that? Because mental health treatment should be treated as an ailment of brain rather than something with a taboo. Unfortunately, we don't have enough trained people to get everybody on the same page, so that people who do not want to be reached can be reached. I'm not trained in that, so I have no idea.
Well, this leads to another question. What is mental illness? Some of the people who are doing mass murders are doing it because they've come to believe that there's ills in the world, and they are going to be the heroes to fix at least a portion of it. Other people are angry for whatever reason. The life isn't going the way they want it to for whatever reason, and they lash out when they're confronted or threatened. Is that mental illness?
But from my standpoint, I would like to call all disorders as disorders of the brain, rather than label it as mental illness, because how we at this time people segregate. Somebody has Parkinson's disease and you say, oh, that's the neurological problem. Somebody has depression and they are labeled separately, differently, which I don't like actually, because everything is happening in the brain. Why can't we treat it that way? But the problem is that understanding that what actually drives people to become depressed, what makes people hear voices, has not been that easy. There's a lot of research being done to understand that, and we are not there yet. Brain is very complicated. Even to understand Parkinson's disease is so complicated that let alone understanding depression. Although there are pharmacological interventions available.
I'm not talking about depression. A guy, Pizzagate, perfect
Yes.
example.
Yes.
A guy becomes convinced that in the basement of this particular pizza shop, there are children being abused, and he's going to go in and fix the problem. He goes in there, and it turns out there's no basement, there are no children. He was wrong. Had he gone in there and found a basement with children being abused, would he be mentally ill?
Very difficult question. But
Because
the question is, how did the person was the person convinced by somebody else, or did he convince himself? So these are very difficult questions for a therapist could handle that, could understand, may begin to understand after talking to the person.
well,
But it's very difficult to project.
Yeah, there are an awful lot of things that I believe that I have not witnessed myself. I've been told, and I have no reason to doubt it. And in many cases, I take actions in my life based on those beliefs. I'm sure every one of the participants in the panel feels exactly the same way. Whether it's mental illness or not may well depend upon whether I was right or not. I haven't changed. My beliefs haven't changed, etc. The question is, did reality or my perception of reality prove me to be correct or incorrect?
I gave you the example of blood transfusion.
Right.
There are believers who say blood transfusion is wrong.
Mhm.
Although the child is dying, unless they get a blood transfusion, but the belief system drives that thing that they have. And you, as Colleen pointed out, you have to treat them as they are individuals, as they are human beings, but at the same time, treat them with compassion and make them understand that there is a need, that behavior has to change to make sure the baby lives. So how do you do that? And you cannot label that as mental illness, or you cannot label that as neurological disorder. It's a belief. And so are all beliefs mental illness then, or neurological disorders? So I have no answer to that.
Yeah, well, it makes a difference when you start talking about whether you're going to fix it or not. In other words, if I believe something and you believe something else, if I'm in charge, you have a mental disorder.
Yes.
Because
that's the end of that.
I believe one thing, and therefore that's the way it has to be. If I'm on the other side, I don't particularly like that approach.
But at the same time, if you take Colleen's argument, you have to treat the person the way they are, accept the difference. And I agree with her, accept that they are different. But then how do you manage these nuances that come forth because of those beliefs, because of those differences that impacts the society at large? Because if the baby dies, society is affected. Or somebody doesn't get a transplant because they believe X, Y, and Z, society is affected. But then it becomes very, very complicated.
Probably a subject for another show.
Yes, I think so. It sounds like that.
Okay, Anybody got anything closing, assuming we're still on the air?
Probably a minute or two.
I think Chuck has to speak about it, something.
Chuck, you've
No.
been called out.
I'm all-
Pull it all together, Chuck. We've been everywhere.
no.
All righty. Well, I think that, assuming that we're still on the air, that we have capability to do a great deal more than we have the understanding